Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adi, and today we've got a special guest, someone who got top 4 in the North American region of Players Cup 3. We have Alec Rubin. Alec, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really happy that you could come on for the second time. But for those who didn't see your first team report on the channel, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so probably a lot of people don't know me. I started playing back in 2014. I went to events for a few years. I played in Worlds in 15 and sort of stopped going to events like mid 2016. Wasn't a fan of the format. Then took a couple year break. Haven't really been to events since then. But have started playing recently. With everything being online now, it's a bit easier to get back into things. And most recently, Players Cup 1, I got top 16 in North America using a Porygon Z team that was on Adi's channel a few months back, and then didn't play in PC2 just because of work commitments. Was starting up my new job with my new team, so had a lot going on then, but ended up playing in this one. Like Adi said, got top 4. So better result, I guess. Nice to be in like the winner bracket this time instead of loser, so it's always good.
Yeah, and then hopefully you can get top 4 in the global finals, and then you're going to be forced to go back to events in real life.
Yeah, it might work like that. So we'll see. Would be nice to get an international flight paid for if they can do that. So we'll
Yeah,
see
and
about
so
that.
like you said, you took a little bit of a break for Series 7. So can you talk me through your team building process in Series 8 and how you came across this team that you built for
Yeah,
Players Cup?
yeah. So didn't do much in the early part of Series 7. After about probably a month and a half in, right? I think as like PC2 finals were just ending, I started picking it up a bit. Made a very like week 1 meta type trick room team with like weakness policy, Glastrier, brick break, Dusclops, stuff like that. Basically just played that all through Series 7, played that through the qualifiers, and then when Series 8 started up, I went over and I instead just sort of used more like standard Zacian stuff to start with. For the first few weeks, played like a Zacian Lapras, Thunderous team, very standard. But as we sort of picked up in NPA, started playing around with some other stuff just because uh, didn't want to have to use the same team every week and just get counter teamed every week, which has happened in the past. So I started playing around with some other stuff. Wasn't a huge fan of some stuff like Shadow Rider. But one thing that did happen was one of the other players was going to be going up against a Calyrex team, potentially Calyrex-Ice. So I sort of just picked it up to give him a practice match, and I enjoyed using it quite a bit more than I did really anything else in the metagame up to that point. I really like the ability to like function in and out of Trick Room with teams and sort of have that ability to sort of play Trick Room when it's optimal for you and your opponent can't stop it, but you have other options to do other things. So Calyrex really has that sort of depth of gameplay that I enjoyed. So I started building a bit more around that. Um, and that's really sort of where the genesis of the team came about. To talk more specifically about the concept itself, one thing I did enjoy is like setting up Trick Room and just having that ability to like instantly sweep with weakness policy. So the idea was sort of to just pair that with Sun. There's not a lot of teams that once Trick Room is up can handle both Eruption, Torkoal, and Glacial Lance. And if they can, it's basically just with Incineroar, so you can exploit that. So that was really the genesis of the team, sort of how that came about.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like the team worked really well for you. Can you talk me through some of the individual Pokemon choices and maybe how you came across the specific sets that you used?
Yeah. So just to start with, the idea very basically, when I started playing with Calyrex-Ice, was to go for the sort of self-proc weakness policy, that lets you basically just get Trick Room up, and then ideally you're going to win by the time Trick Room ends. So originally the team was something like Calyrex-Ice, Porygon 2, Incineroar, I think a Moongus, Tapu Fini, and I believe Thundurus was the last one, with the idea being it was basically a hard Trick Room team, but you had Thundurus as like this alternate mode, where it was Assault Dust Thundurus. I believe it had Brutal Swing to give you coverage both when you max as well as an alternate weakness policy activation. The problem I had with that was it was very much just dependent on Calyrex. The entire team was basically Calyrex and 4 supports, and then Thundurus wasn't really a support. brought that. But you weren't bringing that a ton. It was really matchup specific. So basically, when Calyrex died, you lost the game. So sort of what I wanted to do from there is continue with the self-proc weakness policy idea. And the very basic thing that people are using there is Mimikyu. The reason why I like Mimikyu over like something like Porygon Z or Dusclops is you have the ability to basically always get Trick Room up. In between Disguise and Mental Herb, there's very few leads that can actually threaten to not get Trick Room up. And oftentimes with this team, you're basically just getting Trick Room up. And you should not always win the match, obviously, but it puts you in such a huge position that if you can get Trick Room up, you're really just set for most of it. So to talk about sort of those two sets first, they're both pretty straightforward EV spreads. Mimikyu is max HP, max defense. Basically, the idea behind that is what you want to survive after Disguise breaks is either a super effective attack or just a strong like Dynamax attack or something. And there's a lot more attacks from the physical side that you can survive than you can survive from the special side. And there's a lot of special attacks that you just survive anyway. So like you're not going to survive Kyogre Water Spout, even if you put like 252, 252 special defense. I don't think it survives. You're not going to survive like a Charizard attack. But at the same time, you're going to survive Vine Lash even if something is somehow moving before Venusaur. But with the physical defense, there's a lot more things that sort of do a lot of damage, like say Groudon. If Charizard breaks Disguise with Heat Wave, you can take Precipice Blades better. Just a lot of slower stuff. Like if you have fast Pokemon and Metagross doesn't max Dynamax, then Mimikyu has a pretty good chance to survive after Disguise breaks, even if it's 252 attack, Adamant. So the spread specifically, it was originally actually 252 HP, 244 defense. But to always survive Cinderace, Life Orb, Pyro Ball, when it's G-Max, which hits like 160 before stab and Life Orb boost, when it's Jolly, you actually need exactly 252, 252. So I just put that in because the extra 4 special defense wasn't going to matter.
And that's relevant because Cinderace's G-Max hits through Disguise with its
yeah,
G-Max
exactly. So with the thought being that there are probably going to be times where either you can fake out the other Pokemon, I guess, and then it'll go through, or if you have something that's even faster than Cinderace that knocks out Indeedee right away, and then G-Max Pyro Ball, most people aren't expecting you to be 252 HP, 252 Impish Mimikyu, so you survive a lot of attacks people don't expect you to with this kind of set as well. The moves, Shadow Sneak and Trick Room should be pretty self-explanatory. Shadow Sneak goes into Calyrex to activate weakness policy, which is pretty much the crux of the team. Trick Room is obviously to get the speed advantage with Calyrex as well. Will-O-Wisp and Safeguard were more just tech choices. Will-O-Wisp is mainly useful for some Pokemon either like Metagross, where Mimikyu actually outspeeds before you get Trick Room up. Sometimes it's smarter to just take a turn, not get Trick Room up, and Will-O-Wisp that first to neuter it before going to Trick Room. Or just sort of once Trick Room is up, there's a lot of powerful physical attacks in the format that if you can cut damage, that's generally going to be more valuable than doing some other stuff. Safeguard was originally just a tech move for Amoonguss, despite this team having a lot of Amoonguss checks between everything. Sash Amoonguss, especially if it's in the back and they play well with it, can actually really hurt the team because it can survive Eruption from Torkoal with Sash and then it can sleep Calyrex or something like that. So Safeguard was mainly, the idea was you're just going to put Safeguard up when you have an extra turn in Trick Room. But where it comes in handy as well is either with stuff like Torkoal that runs a support set with Yawn and Burning Jealousy or Venusaur or something like that. You put Safeguard up and it protects you for the rest of Trick Room, and it can potentially protect you once Trick Room is up as well. I had a game in Players Cup where I put Safeguard up in the middle of Trick Room, and then I was able to get another Safeguard up because the Venusaur wasn't able to Sleep Powder me, and I was able to use Trick Room again once Trick Room expired to sort of get 5 more turns and win from there. So it ended up being a really useful move in a lot of sets that I really hadn't appreciated because I wasn't clicking it a bunch before the tournament. Calyrex is also pretty straightforward. Glacial Lance is just a really strong spread move. It's stab. You're going to be using that either as max Hailstorm most of the time or just Glacial Lance outside of max. 130 base power, I believe, on both Pokemon with Ice type is pretty good. High horsepower is really just mostly for Incineroar or other fire types. Hits steel types as well. If you get a Shadow Sneak off or otherwise proc your weakness policy. Even +2 max quake is going to do a lot to water types as well that you can't hit with Glacial Lance. So just a useful coverage move. The last couple moves are sort of more changeable, I think. A lot will run like Heavy Slam for the mirror. I wasn't too concerned about going into the mirror just because with 7 matches, Calyrex is sub 10% usage, so the odds of getting the mirror aren't that huge. And you have Torkoal and Trick Room and like Incineroar out of it, and Will-O-Wisp Mimikyu, you can kind of play around that. So I really like Trick Room because it gives you sort of the alternate ability to set Trick Room if you don't bring Mimikyu, just because I didn't really like the risk of not being able to get up the Trick Room mode a lot of the time if Mimikyu was just a poor choice. And then Protect. Some of them drop Protect as well. I like Protect mainly just because in an open team sheet tournament like Players Cup, your opponent's going to know if you don't have Protect and they're going to be able to exploit that. So it's really bad when like Trick Room runs out and you need to choose. Do you want to like protect Calyrex and attack his Acian, or do you want to read that they're going to sub or something and attack his Acian? And if you don't have Protect, you just don't have the option. So that was the thinking there. The other big thing to note is that this isn't minimum speed. That's for 2 reasons. One is for Incineroar. I'll talk about that a bit later, but Incineroar is actually slower than Calyrex to get U-turn off and Trick Room. The other thought is basically in the mirror matchup, I wanted to just ignore having to set Trick Room. So the thought is if they're minimum speed, they're going to have to get up Trick Room to do well against me, so I just won't set Trick Room, and I'll just attack a turn while they have to burn a turn on that. And then if they're planning for their Calyrex to operate pretty consistently outside Trick Room, they'll probably have some investments to just underspeed them there. There's probably some magic number that's like a 27 IV on this that maybe works out better so that you always like underspeed ones that are no speed investment, but this worked well enough. I didn't encounter the mirror, so ultimately it didn't matter much. The only concern with that is sometimes like minimum speed, Porygon 2 will underspeed you in Trick Room if it has foul play. Sometimes the Umbreon has a weird speed as well. That will mess you up if it has foul play, but because Incineroar is slower, you can actually speed check those, usually, especially Porygon 2, because the ability is going to activate. So you know how fast they are, and you can actually exploit that because they don't expect you to go before them outside of Trick Room. So like, a couple times in practice, I would just Shadow Sneak, Glacial Lance, or Max Hailstorm turn 1 and do a lot of damage, something that didn't expect it. I'm just going down the list from there. Indeedee and Incineroar are both mainly used to get Trick Room up. The idea being that in an open team sheets tournament, you're basically going to know what their Trick Room checks are no matter what, and some combination of Incineroar, Mimikyu, Indeedee is always going to be able to get Trick Room. Sometimes you just need to bring one. With Calyrex, and you can get it up. Sometimes you have to go like Incin, Indeedee, and Mimikyu or something like that. But you're always going to be able to find something. Like most cases, the only real case where you can't get Trick Room up without getting unlucky, and if you lead right, is basically something fast that can one-hit knock out Indeedee, and then like a Kyurem or something that can knock out Mimikyu through disguise, which is a pretty niche situation. So the spread on Indeedee, the EV spread is pretty similar in thinking to Mimikyu, where you're just going to try and survive the physical stuff as much as possible. I did consider a spread that would always survive like Timid Kyogre Water Spout. That was like 252 HP. I think it was exactly like 128 defense, 128 special defense calm. But I was never going to use that because I was just going to worry they were modest, and I didn't want to just EV so much in special defense. Expanding Force is pretty standard. Because you set Psychic Terrain, you can Expanding Force. You're not clicking that much. It's just Indeedee is usually just getting knocked out. Helping Hand is the idea. You get Trick Room up. Helping Hand, Glacial Lance, or Eruption is going to hurt a lot. Follow Me is the main reason it's there. Follow Me plus Psychic Surge stops a lot of what is going to shut down Trick Room. Either like blocking fake outs if you lead Calyrex, or just redirecting anything away from Calyrex or Mimikyu. Protect is there as well, just sort of give a change up. Sometimes if you have something out like Indeedee and Incineroar, they might just like use a dark type attack into Indeedee, and then you can just block that. It's also useful for like spread moves sometimes if you want to just avoid a spread move for a turn, something like that. The 29 speed IVs is just so that if Rillaboom or Tapu Fini's on the other team and you both lead them, you're going to underspeed them most of the time. Running lower than 31 is a pretty big liability on those, whereas it doesn't really matter for Indeedee, so that's a thought there. The item is probably pretty interesting. I kept going back and forth between Sash and safety goggles. Safety goggles is ultimately what I went with, both because one, it just gives another answer to Amoonguss. Amoonguss is basically a dead lead if you bring in DD, because at most it's kind of like be able to pollen puff you for 30% or something. It also is really helpful against Venusaur teams where you can lead NDD and they can't just sleep powder you. It's a bit riskier with Incineroar because you can fake them out, but they can just max, and then they can like double into the Mimikyu slot and potentially take it out if the partner is strong. Or they can max Quake. They can start getting their Vine Lash up and doing a lot of damage to you, and you don't really want that if you like lead Incineroar and then you have to pivot out. So bring in DD to just sort of suppress Venusaur as well as a lead. Sash was the other option. It's useful in some cases, especially against like Kyogre, where you want to be able to like take a Water Spout and redirect a slower attack. And for other cases, the problem with that is the Indeedee Mimikyu lead specifically puts on so little pressure that there's a lot of times where you actually want like Indeedee to get knocked out on the very first turn. And if you have Sash, they can't really afford to just not attack you on the first turn, because if you have a free switch out to Calyrex and you set Trick Room with Mimikyu, they're so far behind. But what they might do is just fire like one attack in there to cover a Calyrex switch, and they'll just leave Indeedee alive. So next turn you have Mimikyu, Indeedee, and you're wasting a turn at Trick Room trying to get something in, and you're like doing 20% with Expanding Force and you Will-O-Wisp or something. So that's the reason why I ultimately didn't go with Sash. There's a lot of times where you prefer Sash. I don't think safety goggles ever ended up mattering in the tournament because either I had Safeguard up when Amoonguss came in, or I didn't bring Indeedee when they brought Venusaur, or something like that. But it was the nice insurance policy. In an open team tournament as well, just having the threat of safety goggles can deter people. When they know it's there, it is still going to stop them from playing a certain way. So a lot of those tech items and moves, I think, can still be helpful, like Mental Herb too. Like the thought with Mental Herb is, well, they just know they won't taunt now because it's open team sheets. But just having the threat of that on there is going to change the way they play, and it's going to manipulate what they do. The Incineroar spread is probably the most unusual spread here. It's the only one that's not like 252, 252. So there's a couple things going on with that. First, I wanted to use U-Turn to give an alternate activation for Calyrex-Ice's weakness policy. And then from there, Assault Dust is kind of the natural choice for the item, just because if you don't have Parting Shot and you have U-Turn instead, you're basically going to be using all attacks anyway. So Assault Dust giving that extra 50% in special defense is just so huge in a lot of matchups. Moves are pretty straightforward. Beyond that, Fake Out, Flare Blitz are both standards on all the Incineroars. Darkest Lariat is because in the Calyrex Shadow Rider matchup, you're basically always maxing Incineroar, and that's where the EVs come into play. 252, 244. It means max Quake is always going to be a 3-hit KO, or if there's some situation where they get like a helping hand off. If you max and they max, then you can take 2 helping hand boosted max Quakes. That one is a bit less relevant. What is relevant is like turn 1, Fake Out or onto the partner, they max Quake, you get Trick Room up. Turn 2, you can like take out an Indeedee and they can max Quake again, and you can survive if you die max Incineroar. The rest of the EVs are just into attack. There weren't much left. A lot of people run like really bulky sets on Assault Dust still, where it's like 252 HP. Special defense boosting nature. One of the things I've always preferred is running like more attack on Assault Dust sets, just because I think the Assault Dust kind of justifies you being able to do more damage, which Incineroar can kind of lack. And sort of this team as a whole can kind of lack damage, especially if you go with like Calyrex, Indeedee, Incineroar, Mimikyu. Calyrex is really your only damage dealer. So just having that extra power could be nice. The one other thing is the speed IVs. It's actually 1 point slower than Calyrex. That was because originally I was running this and I was running it like 252 HP, 4 attack, 4 defense, 4 speed. The problem was that one, so many Incineroars are just running speed investment. You're never outspeeding them anyway. They're just speed creeping you. And 84 is like the magic number to hit to like outspeed Venusaur at +1. So I figured a lot of people would be running that. Or if they weren't, they would still just run 12 or 20, and you couldn't really afford to give that up. So I was getting outsped all the time. And it was like, The other idea was sometimes you'd have a turn where you can like turn one, they'll double protect because of fake out pressure, and then you use U-turns out of Trick Room. But I was literally never using that. So what I ended up doing was I made it slower than Calyrex because that way, like turn one, you can fake out, or like if you get Incineroar in the middle of the game, you're going to think that you're going to fake out turn one. And because everyone's just used to fast Incineroar, no one expects it to be slower. So if Trick Room is up, you U-turn, and you just get a ton of damage off. I used that like I think 3 times during the tournament. It basically was huge in winning me each set where that happened, just because there's not really a good way to stop it where if you're playing as if they're going to just attack and do like 20% with Incineroar instead, you're getting O-code by a Calyrex move. It's a nice option to have. It's also useful because since you're in Trick Room so often with the team, you're going to have the faster fake out in Trick Room if 2 Incineroars come out at the same time. And also in the case where Trick Room isn't up, you're going to have the slower U-turn, so they can parting shot Incineroar, and then you can U-turn and get Calyrex or Venusaur or something in without lowering attack or parting shot. And also, if they just attack in that slot, Incineroar wants to be taking attacks more than most other things on the team. So slow U-turn is also good there. The last part is the Sun mode. Originally, it didn't include Venusaur, and I just sort of brought Torkoal in. What I had noticed is that there's so many teams in the format that just don't have answers to like Charcoal, Eruption, Torkoal, and Trick Room when it's paired with Calyrex, because a lot of stuff that's going to resist Eruption is going to be weak to Calyrex. And a lot of stuff that's going to be good against Calyrex is going to be weak to Eruption, like Steel types, like Zacian, for example. So the idea was at some point you're going to maneuver Trick Room, you're going to get those both in, and there's going to be teams that have 0 answers to Eruption, Glacial Lance. There's going to be teams that their answer is Incineroar, so you just call the switch and you max Quake and you just win from there. For the set, pretty straightforward as well, just maximizing damage. Charcoal Torkoal has kind of fallen by the wayside. In the past 2 series, originally that's what people were using back like series 3 or 4 when we first got Charizard. It was like Charizard, Venusaur, Eruption, Torkoal with Charcoal, and you were just doing a ton of damage just on it. That was it. But people started using the more supportive sets with Citrus or Sash or whatever item you want to put on it. I mean, I think those are pretty strong, especially if you don't have a Trick Room option, because you can't really guarantee Eruption damage very often. But when you're in Trick Room specifically, you can just get Eruption off as the first move so often that the extra damage is really nice. It's really sad when you like run Burning Jealousy support Torkoal and you Burning Jealousy and you do 20% with the Sun Boosted Fire move to both Mons or something like that. So that's the thinking behind Charcoal. I still think I would prefer a supportive set if you were on a non-Trick Room team, but when you're on Trick Room, I think Charcoal is probably a stronger option. Heatwave and Eruption should both be pretty straightforward. Eruption you use when you are at higher than like 60% or wherever it's higher than 90 base power. When you get below 90 base power, you decide whether you want the extra power from Heatwave or you want to shoot off Eruption with like guaranteed accuracy, even if it's a bit lower power. Protect as well, pretty straightforward on attacking Pokemon. Yawn is probably the one that's a bit flexible. Up until literally like the night before I locked my team, I had Body Press there. The idea being it gives you another answer against Incineroar. The issue is if you don't go like full defense investment, Body Press is like roll to 2-hit knockout most Incineroar, even if they don't have Citrus Berry. And if they have Citrus, it's going to be a 3-hit knockout. And that was really underwhelming, and I was basically never clicking it. So I just figured I would throw Yawn on there, just because it gives you another option, either in Trick Room, if you know that there's going to be something Torkoal can't deal with, like an Incineroar or just anything else that resists fire moves. You just throw Yawn on. Like a Dragapult, you Yawn it. If you're in or out of Trick Room, it restricts their options. You Yawn their Dynamax. They don't have a ton of options there either. Only got clicked a couple of times, but it was really helpful all the times it did, and was pretty instrumental in winning the game. So that was nice as well. Also, just something that was funny with this, originally was for defense to sort of increase body press damage, but when I switched it, I just moved over to special defense, and then I won a game because I survived a Scald in the sun from like 2/3 health was exactly 1 HP. So special defense actually did end up mattering, which is more than I can say for most of the spreads since they're pretty straightforward. Venusaur is the last one. The idea behind Venusaur was basically, since you have Torkoal already, you don't want to be locked into the sort of hard Trick Room mode that some teams are. The issue is either if you're going up against another Trick Room team, or you are going up against the odd team that can like always guarantee that you don't get Trick Room up, or if you're up against something like Solgaleo or Duskmane, where even if you get Trick Room up, if they're like a +2 Solgaleo from a Bulldoze or they Swords Dance with Duskmane, you're still not doing a ton with Calyrex and just going to get knocked out in a turn. If they Dynamax it, of course. So the idea with Venusaur is just to give an alternate mode against some teams, and put a lot of pressure on turn one, both in terms of restricting their options because they always have to cover Venusaur. They can't just lead something that you can just Sleep Powder, you can Vine Lash turn one, and just win from there. So it really does help in restricting their leads. And then there are just games where you lead it as well, into teams either that can't handle it or something that's really useful in a tournament like this where it's best of three. Game one, you can lead your hard Trick Room lead. And then once they adjust to whatever you did, in game one, you just use Venusaur instead. And they all of a sudden don't have plan to deal with Venusaur. You can either Sleep Powder, you can Vine Lash, you can do whatever. For the moves and item, I know a lot of people have used the defensive Cobra Berry set. I haven't been a huge fan of that. I've always thought the damage output was really lacking from that. Once I had a Regieleki that got outsped by a timid Venusaur that had, I assume, Sash, and then it didn't get knocked out by Earth Power, which I won the game off of. So that experience sort of turned me off from using non-Life Orb Venusaur for the rest of the sets I've played since then. I went with Timid Nature just because the Venusaur won, the mirror is common. A lot of people are using Venusaur. I think there was 10 in the top 16 in North America, or 9 or something like that. But it was the second most common Pokemon besides Incineroar. So you're going to fight a lot of other Venusaurs. You want to be able to move faster than them, especially if you have Water Ball. It's also useful because you outspeed Timid, Regieleki, and Sun. You can't do that with Modest. And since you know if they have Sash or not, you know if you can just Max Quake and knock them out turn one, or if they're going to be able to Electro Web you or something like that. So it's useful there as well. Frenzy Plant I picked over Leaf Storm just because either Venusaur is maxing turn one and the extra damage, 150 versus Leaf Storm and max is 140, I believe, is actually pretty significant, especially if you click Vine Lash twice. You're basically always clicking it at least once unless Venusaur gets knocked out early, and you don't expect that. Just because you want to get the Vine Lash damage up, that's just so good in this format to get the 1/6 damage up every single turn. On the opponent's two Pokemon. So you're going to click that once. Sometimes you're going to click it 3 times. So getting the extra 8% or whatever it comes out to be is really useful. The other thought is sometimes Venusaur either doesn't max or it's done maxing and then you switch it out or something. Basically, it's only going to get one attack off until it dies because since they know you have Sleep Powder, they know they can't risk leaving Venusaur alive just Sleep Powder your entire team. So you just fire off Frenzy Plant, and even though you can't move next turn, it doesn't matter because Venusaur just gets knocked out anyway. Earth Power is for Incineroar, basically. It's also nice for like Torkoal or something else randomly, like a Steel type. But it's really just for Incineroar. It also boosts special defense if you're just going to knock something out anyway and you have Vine Lash up already. But something that's interesting, Timid Life Orb Venusaur, since you know what their Incineroar item is going to be, you're going to know if it's Assault Vest or Shuckaberry, and if it's not going to take a lot. But if it's not one of those, Helping Hand, Max Quake, knocks out most Incineroar unless they're like super specially defense invested, then it's a roll. But usually it takes it out. So one of the leads I like to do to change it up, what people aren't expecting, is like Venusaur Indeedee, and you threaten something else. They think you're going to Vine Lash turn one. Instead, you just Helping Hand, Max Quake, and knock out Incineroar right away. So that's a nice option to have with Earth Power as well. Weather Ball is a really useful move as well. I know a lot of people have been dropping Sludge Bomb or Earth Power for Weather Ball. I ended up dropping Sludge Bomb just because the coverage isn't tremendously useful if you also have Weather Ball and Sun Up. Sludge Bomb is mainly useful for hitting like either grass types, like Rillaboom is probably the only main one at this point, but either getting like consistent damage off on Rillaboom, hitting Amoonguss with a stab move, something like that. But when you have Incineroar, Torkoal, and Calyrex, you're not really concerned with hitting grass types too often. So it wasn't tremendously useful. Max Ooze also wasn't super useful because this team, it wanted to move so fast, either in or out of Trick Room. Taking the turn to do special attack generally wasn't worth it. So that's why I went with Weather Ball. It's mainly useful for like Zacian. Against 4 HP Zacian, Timid Life Orb Weather Ball is 15 out of 16 chance to KO against any Zacian. max flare off of Weather Ball if you have Sun up is going to KO them. That's the other thing that sort of is important with Weather Ball is it actually gives you max flare when Sun is up, and it's basically a stab max flare, or if even if Sun isn't up, it's basically a stab 100 base power move because you're getting the 1.5 boost from Sun. So having that extra damage capability was really nice on a type that Venusaur typically can't get. So you can hit some stuff that's not expecting it. You can also get some dumb situations where, like, against standard for an ogre, sometimes you can like max Geyser their Incineroar once they put Sun up with Kyogre or something like that. I think I had one game where I could have potentially like max Hailstormed or just like Ice Attack to Landorus, but didn't end up doing that, but it was an option as well. Just the nice options Weather Ball gives that if you're creative, people don't really expect it. Sleep Powder is the last move. A lot of people have been changing that to Protect. I'm not a fan of that for a couple of reasons. Just one, because in an open team sheets tournament, Protect loses so much efficacy. The main reason it's useful is because in best of one, you just have to assume Venusaur has Sleep Powder, because if you're like, oh, I'm just going to go with Venusaur, they Sleep Powder you turn one and you lose if they hit your max or you're restricted to one. But with Sleep Powder, you're putting that immediate pressure on where even if Venusaur doesn't Gigantamax, you can still do a lot to tear apart their team. So that was the thing there over Protect. People are putting Protect on Life Orb sets because obviously if you don't have a Focus Sash or Cold Berry, you're going to get knocked out a lot more often. It's like sometimes just getting a Sleep Powder up and getting Trick Room is good enough for the team. They can afford that Venusaur get knocked out turn one as well. That was the thinking there. So yeah, that's basically long explanation for each set, but
Yeah, and it just goes to show you, like, these sets look pretty standard. There's nothing that's especially unique. I think a lot of these Pokemon, like, it's been like 8 weeks of Series 8 now, and so we've played a lot of this series, and we kind of know what the optimal sets are. We've seen them across all the other grassroots tournaments, which a lot of them had open team sheets, so we could really see exactly what all the top teams were using. And yet there has still been so much thought put into every single Pokemon, every single set, just ouncing every single value out of each Pokemon with like the Incineroar speed stat, the move sets on Mimikyu, Torkoal, all that sort of thing. And it's really great to see that you've found so much success partially because of these like real micro optimizations that people might not think about when they're putting their team together. But were there any moves that you really missed having on any of these Pokemon that you wish you had?
yeah, in the tournament, not really. But I guess that's sort of one, it's the nature of the matchups. I wasn't really expecting matchups where like some of those other moves are important. And there were definitely times where it could have happened, but like when you get to like finals, generally it means you ended up where matchups where your choices were optimal. But there's a couple cases where other moves could be really useful. Specifically Calyrex, Heavy Slam is really useful in the Mirror to Steel Spike. Sometimes you handle the mirror fine with Torkoal and Incineroar, but against other like well-built Calyrex teams, they're generally going to have some way to beat fire types, because if they don't, then Calyrex teams aren't very good. So playing around that is hard. Being able to just Shadow Sneak max Steel Spike turn one would be really nice. But since Calyrex was so low usage, didn't really think it was too big a concern. Didn't end up playing any, so obviously it worked out well enough. The other thing where Steel Spike is really useful is Kyurem White, which is actually a really bad matchup for this team. And I was really scared because I've seen some on high ladder, and I know some people have been considered using it just because it's so good against like both Kyogre and Sun. So I was really worried about just like losing to one because I didn't put Steel Spike on. And I specifically saw like an Urshifu Kyurem team like right after I locked this, and I was really worried that I was going to lose to that because they were going to knock out Indeedee and knock out Mimikyu, and I was just going to lose on turn one. So I started panicking about that, but ultimately I didn't fight any of those, so that was nice. The other big move you're missing out on is no play rough on Mimikyu. It's only really relevant versus Urshifu, which isn't too high usage. But it would also be nice just like have an actual damage dealing option, because there's some times where you don't want to switch out Mimikyu because you don't want Torkoal to take damage, you don't want Calyrex to take damage when it switches in. So basically your best turn is just Will-O-Wisping a special attacker when you're under Trick Room, putting up Safeguard because they might have something in the back. So having Play Rough is an actual damage dealing option, because Shadow Sneak, when you don't have any attack investment, does like 10% to everything, which is not what you want to be doing. But I think with how the Mimikyu set was, and the damage dealing options from like Torkoal and Calyrex and Venusaur, if you don't have Trick Room up, wasn't too big of a concern there either.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then the other thing that I noticed about the team is that you've got a lot of physical defense investment on a lot of different Pokemon, even like, and then a lot of ways to mitigate physical damage with things like Will-O-Wisp and things like Intimidate. But the team almost seems like it's lacking on the special side, where something like Torkoal is just inherently weaker on the special side. The Mimikyu and Indeedee aren't trained to be especially bulky. And how did you deal with these powerful special attackers that you didn't really have the ability to take attacks from?
Yeah, I mean, there's two lines of thought with that. The first is that you're not taking attacks from Kyogre, or Charizard, and Sun or something like that, even if you are investing in special defense. That was really thought number one was you're going to get knocked out anyway. You may as well optimize the things you actually can survive. The other thought is you also have Earth Power and High Horsepower on Venusaur and Calyrex, respectively, which means you're going to have access to Max Quake. You're basically always maxing Venusaur, Calyrex most of the time. The exception to that is in either the Calyrex Shadow matchup where you max Incineroar most of the time, or if like your plan falls apart and you have to panic max like Mimikyu or Torkoal or something, which generally you're either winning the turn to do that or you lose because you have to do that. It wasn't optimal. So you had the option to max Quake as well. But beyond that, a lot of the powerful special attackers don't do well against Calyrex-Ice. Like Gigantamax Charizard, if you get Trick Room up, where against like Sun teams, you generally lead like Incineroar or Mimikyu, so you can like turn one and get Trick Room up because Mimikyu won't get knocked out by Press Fist Blades, and it'd be really bizarre if like a Charizard was slower than a Groudon to break Disguise. But Charizard can't take a +2 max Hailstorm. When you Dynamax it, if it's already taken a turn of Life Orb and Sun damage from Solar Power, even if it's Gigantamax, it's also going to get knocked out by a +1 max Hailstorm, even if they switch in like an Incineroar or something. And then if you get Hail up with max Hailstorm and they max flare you, Gigantamax or Dynamax Calyrex can take that pretty well as well. So really, it was just a matter of either making sure you can force the optimal matchups. Like against something like Kyogre, you can either just go Venusaur turn one and Vine Lash and take it out before it does too much damage if you switch Torkoal in, or you just have Calyrex, you start mitigating damage with changing the weather, Max Quake, and going from there. I think most of the Pokemon that are really scary that the team doesn't handle it very well are all like physical attackers. Like Solgaleo is scary because it can Sunsteel Strike, Mimikyu, and just knock it out through Disguise as well. Duskmane, you really don't have a good way to hit besides Torkoal. Metagross can be annoying for similar reasons as Solgaleo, although it's a bit less of a problem because it doesn't have the ability to ignore Disguise. Some stuff like that, as well as just like random stuff like opposing Calyrex, Zacian, things like that, where you want to have the ability to potentially take an attack with an Intimidate. Bold Nature Indeedee, for example, will always take Jolly, Zacian, Behemoth Blade. It takes like max attack investment adamant, like I think 50% of the time, but most people aren't going to be using that. They're going to be either Jolly max attack or they're going to be more bulky. So it's just stuff like that where you know what you can and can't survive, and the things that you want to be surviving more often are physical type attacks. So you just need to play around with special attacks when they come up, and you can sort of bank on the bulk to survive physical side and your play to survive special side.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like the defense investment isn't because it is because you have shakier matchups into a lot of physical attackers, and
Yeah.
not because you needed to live those special attacks. And so, can you talk me through some of the game plans against common teams that are in the metagame right now?
Yeah. So when you look at this team itself, I think it's pretty obvious that this team isn't like one where you go through and you thought about, well, what weaknesses, resistances do I have, stuff like that. Like a typically built team, me especially, I'm gonna make sure and like you have one resistance to everything or one immunity to something like ground, and like one way to hit like every type. But like this one, you have no flying resistances, you have no ground resistances, and two ground weaks. A lot of stuff like that. So this team is really built to maximize the fact that in a tournament like Players Cup, where especially after like the first round, you know you're going to be playing against mostly pretty good people who are going to be playing mostly pretty standard teams that you can plan against. So because of that, it's really optimized to beat sort of teams that I thought would be big, which was basically Sun, Kyogre stuff, some Zacian stuff. Some Zacian can be iffier, and then Calyrex Shadow. The Calyrex Shadow game plan is the easiest, and I think it's probably the most favorable matchup. So I didn't end up playing against any, and there was only one in top 16, which surprised me. And I was also would have been surprised that I could go 7-0 without fighting one, because that's kind of what I was making out fighting. But basically, what you do there, you have Mimikyu. And you usually lead Incineroar. If they have something that can really threaten Incineroar, like say Thundurus, you might leave Incin in the back. Sometimes you just bring it in. Anyway, you basically just want to get Trick Room up, and you just want to max Darkness, Calyrex Shadow. It's pretty easy to do. You just play around wherever they're going to send in, and Calyrex Shadow really can't handle Calyrex-Ice and Torkoal in the back. So basically, that one's the most straightforward. Just find a way to get Incineroar Dynamaxed and threatening Calyrex from turn 1. It's pretty hard for them to handle Trick Room unless they're running something really bizarre like, say, Chandelure, but that's not too common now. But the other thing they can do against that, they can like taunt, except they can't because you have Mental Alert on Mimikyu. They can potentially trick eject button you with Whimsicott, except they can't because you can switch Indeedee in and shut down any priority move with Psychic Terrain. So basically a lot of what they want to do to stop Trick Room they can't do. And then you basically can just take care of them from there. Sun is probably the other big matchup to go over just because there were so many of them in Top Cut, both the team you used, you, Colin, and Raga, as well as a few others. But it kind of breaks down what you want to do for the most part is you want to get Trick Room up and have Calyrex-Ice and Torkoal in the back. Whether you lead Indeedee, Mimikyu, or Incineroar Mimikyu really depends what they have. If they have Charizard, Groudon, but no Venusaur, you typically go Incineroar because it's better at taking special attacks than Indeedee. You can U-turn out and you can get another round of Incineroar later. If they have Venusaur and Groudon but no Charizard, you generally go Indeedee because you can sump up a Sleep Powder if they try and go with that. And you can just redirect an attack and have Indeedee get knocked out turn 1. Once you get Incineroar out, usually U-turn turn 1 if you have Incineroar. You basically Calyrex-Ice up, you Shadow Sneak, proc Weakness Policy. If they don't have Charizard, you just kind of Glacial Lance until you think Incineroar comes in, and then you can Max Quake that slot. If they do have Charizard, like I mentioned earlier, if you Shadow Sneak, Max Hailstorm, it's still going to knock out most of the time after they've taken a turn of damage, even if they switch in Incineroar or something. So you have a lot of options there. Obviously, if against the teams that have both, which was most of them, you generally have to choose between Incineroar or Indeedee as a lead. I tend to prefer Indeedee there just because it's a lot easier to just like let it die to Charizard, Groudon, turn 1, than like have Incineroar in where you have to figure out what the Venusaur is going to do. If it's going to Sleep Powder, you want to fake it out. Otherwise, you want to U-turn. So that's generally the plan against that. You also have Torkoal in back just because there's really nothing on that team that takes Eruption very well besides Incineroar. Even Charizard doesn't when Sun is up. It's pretty frail, so it can't really take a Sun boosted Eruption pretty well, especially if it's already gotten chip damage from Life Orb and stuff. Venusaur can't, even Groudon doesn't unless it's like Assault Vest. I did have one matchup as well, like round 1, where I actually ended up Dynamaxing the Torkoal in the Sun matchup because Calyrex had gotten knocked out early because I just kind of let it get knocked out by accident. But something interesting is that Max in Torkoal against Sun can also be kind of helpful because it can knock out Venusaur. I think it's a role to knock out like 4 HP Venusaur, even if they're Gigantamaxed. Obviously, if you're using like a bulky set with screens or something, it's not going to knock out. Still does a lot of damage there. It does a surprisingly high amount of Groudon as well. So that's an option you can have there as well. Kyogre is pretty dependent on what kind of Kyogre team they have. There's probably like 3 big archetypes, which would be the standard Tornogre, that's like Tornadus, Kyogre, Kartana, Moongus, Incineroar, Alec, I think is the last one. From there, you generally just want to get Trick Room up with Mimikyu. They do have a few leads they can do that are problematic, especially if they lead like Regieleki, Kyogre, because they can threaten to just take down Disguise with Electro Web, Water Spout, and take out both Pokemon. And so you generally lead Incin, Mimikyu. You have to guess which one is going to Dmax if they do that. Most of the time they don't lead that though because it's so Venusaur weak. That generally Incineroar, Mimikyu is a safe lead into there. It's a similar game plan where you just bring Calyrex, Torkoal, and back. Torkoal handles like Kartana, Regieleki, Amoonguss really well, and Calyx. Once it starts getting like quakes up or it starts getting hailstorms up, it changes the weather. It doesn't take that much from Kyogre if it's Dynamax. That's your plan there. The other ones that are interesting, there's like the like Dragapult, Porygon 2, Ferrothorn version that or Rayquaza used at some tournaments that a lot of people use. With that one, it's a pretty similar game plan. The one wrinkle is that it's a bit easier for you to set up Trick Room there because they don't have something else fast that can like threaten Mimikyu because they have Pult, but they have to like max Wormwind and Indeedee because Mimikyu uh, is Ghost, so they want to max Phantasm that, but Indeedee is normal, so they can't because you're going to follow me. The one thing to keep in mind with that one is you really need to preserve Torkoal or get Calyrex super boosted because a lot of the time they like bring Ferrothorn against me, which I didn't understand, but it kept happening whenever I would play it on ladder, and it happened in Players Cup, and they decided to bring Ferrothorn against the Sun team. It's like, okay. But you want to preserve Torkoal so that you don't just get swept by Ferrothorn in the end game. Although once, I think this happened in Players Cup where I had Calyrex at like +5 from Weakness Policy, knocking 3 things out in Dynamax. So it one hit knocked out +4 Iron Defense Ferrothorn with Glacial Lance with single
That's
target.
crazy.
So yeah, I was surprised that killed. I thought I was gonna have to like stall out a bit more or get lucky with rolls, but it just knocked it out. So that's a nice option there. The last one is sort of the dual weather team that has like Kyogre, Tornadus, and then also Venusaur and Torkoal. There aren't as many of those, but the problem is I did end up fighting that against John Evans, Ezreal, and the game before, like the win and in winners bracket was against that. So that one's a bit iffier because their last two moms vary a lot, and it's gonna generally be something that's a bit better at taking down Trick Room. Like he had Metagross, which Metagross, if it's like max attack investment, even if Disguise is broken on Mimikyu, has like a chance to knock it out. So you have to be a bit more creative with your lead there. What I ended up doing against him was like Venusaur Mimikyu to have the option to both like attack Kyogre or like Sleep Powder Metagross if he led that. But if he led something that was better against Trick Room, I would go Venusaur. If he led something that was better against the Venusaur mode, I would just go Trick Room and sacrifice Venusaur. One other cool trick you can pull off in the Kyogre matchup, in a best of 3, it only works once. But turn 1, you lead like Venusaur or you lead Indeedee and Mimikyu, and they lead Kyogre and something else that can break through whatever you lead and can like knock out both Indeedee and Mimikyu and take out something else. Or more specifically, what will happen is they have something fast like Tornadus and Kyogre, so they can like Hurricane or Max Airstream Water Spout knock out both turn 1. What you do there is you actually switch Torkoal in turn 1 because they'll generally commit to a Dynamax and think they're not going to set Trick Room up. And they're just gonna beat you from there. So you sacrifice Torkoal turn 1. They Water Spout, they Dynamax or do whatever, attacking Mimikyu, and then you have Trick Room up, you have Sun up. So Kyogre isn't doing much, and you can get a free +2 on Calyrex. Really only works once, but it's like my general backup plan if things aren't going well against Kyogre. So it's just a nice option to have sometimes. With this team especially, a lot of it is sort of more just like playing solitaire, where you're trying to figure out what you need to do. It's like a puzzle where you're going to figure out how do I get Trick Room up and how do I make sure that happens. And sometimes it just involves like sacrificing something turn 1, where you're generally not going to want to sacrifice one of your big damage dealers in turn 1 of those teams. But I think this one is pretty unique in that you have to identify your win cons pretty early. But once you do that, it's sort of smooth sailing. Where a lot of teams like team preview is important, but like figuring out the different changes and matches more so. Where this one, it feels like if you bring the right 4, you're going to win a lot of games, and if you bring the wrong 4, you're going to lose most games. So it's kind of interesting there. On the last big team, is Zacian. Zacian varies so much in terms of what they can provide. The plan against like the standard ones is you just get Trick Room up, and then Torkoal can take care of Zacian and Calyrex can take care of everything else. Sort of the interesting wrinkles there is Lapras. Lapras is kind of fallen out of favor nowadays, but the standard Lapras ones that use like Thundurus, Landorus, Lapras, they're in a bind because they can't really bring Thundurus or Landorus against you because it's just a free knockout for Calyrex and a free boost from the ability. So they're going to want to bring Lapras, so you can generally maneuver around with Venusaur turn one as a change up. Sometimes you'll bring like Venusaur in a game one, and then they lose Lapras to Venusaur, so they change up, and they bring like Landorus game two, but then you change up with your Trick Room. So that's the option there. When it's some other stuff, like the only other real problem Pokemon with Zacian that prevents the sort of Trick Room plan is going to be Colossal, just because what you generally need to do there is lead. You can go Venusaur and you can max break the Colossal or sleep out of the Zace, Dragapult lead or whatever they have. That falls apart if they either just lead like Urshifu and Aqua Jet at turn one, or it falls apart if you get the 50-50 wrong and they just move over turn one a lot of the time if you get it right or wrong. And that's not really how I want to be playing, just because that's just so risky, and I think you can maximize stuff other ways. What you generally have to do against Colossal is like lead Indeedee Mimikyu or lead Calyrex Mimikyu and just hope that or Calyrex Indeedee for that matter, that you can either redirect away the attack they're going to use, that they're going to commit to Gigantamax and Colossal turn one, and that you can use redirection, knock it away, or that you're just not going to get knocked out. I think my play, like D'Angelo, if I had played him instead of John, was basically going to be lead Calyrex, Indeedee, follow me, Trick Room, turn one, and pray I don't get a high roll with like Surf and Heat Wave damage, you get knocked out. And then from there, just kind of make the reads that you have to do. But beyond that, Zacian can be annoying because if Trick Room runs out, especially with Substitute. They can have ways to hit Calyrex. It's pretty easy for them to lead Zacian turn one, hit Substitute, and then they can protect. You have to hit through sub. They can protect, and you have one turn left to Trick Room where they can just switch it out, and then they can do damage later. So you have to be more creative in how you attack it. Because you have Venusaur with Weather Ball, you have Torkoal, you have Incineroar with decent attack investment. You have a lot of ways that you can hit it outside of Calyrex, and of course Max Quake, if you get the boost onto that, is generally going to take it out as well. So that one's probably a matchup where you have to be most creative based on what their team is and just figuring out what you want to do.
Yeah, and I imagine going into Players' Cup finals in order to beat the prophesized Colossal victory, you're going to have to figure out a lot more solid game plan.
Yeah, but my game plan against Colossal was basically me thinking that everyone hyping it up was just making a meme about Colossal winning Players' Cup 3, and then there's 2 from North America and 2 elsewhere. So turns out I was wrong about Colossal just being a meme. So sadly, going to have to find out a better plan, because I really don't want that to win the third one.
Yeah, it's definitely got a target on its back, though, and I'm sure that you can figure out a little more consistent way to beat it, or worst case, just win all the 50-50s.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that sort of speaks to the nature of what I think about Series 8, especially in a tournament like this where you're not playing that many matches, ideally, if you don't lose early. It's okay to have some bad matchups because you're not going to have a team that covers everything. So if you think you have a team that's going to beat what people are using, even if it like has terrible matchups like this one, can't beat Kyura most of the time. It can't beat Solgaleo most of the time unless you play really well. It can't beat Duskmane unless you play really well. But that's fine because people aren't really using those. So if you fight one, it's just like, well, I guess I'm going to be X1 now. But you're not going to fight one. So ideally, if things go to plan, you can build a team that's going to be the big meta threats, which this one probably has 50-50 at worst against most of them, I would say, and probably an above average matchup against most of them. Especially like Sun stuff and Shadow Rider stuff, which I expected to be the 2 biggest things. That's sort of the thinking there, where you can afford to have sort of these bad matchups as long as you just realize most people are going to be using them and you just get a bit lucky, which I think, especially in a format like this in particular, but really any format, getting lucky with matchups is a bigger part of tournament success than I think a lot of people will admit.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I think, maybe even more true this format than ever because of the difference in power level between your restricteds and your other Pokemon. So if they're restricted, kind of goes into your team, like you mentioned with Kyurem. It's really hard to use your other Pokemon to deal with that. But of course, thankfully, Pokemon like Kyurem and Solgaleo have fallen out of favor due to other bigger meta threats. And so it turned out that Calyrex-Ice was just like a really good meta call going into this tournament. And of course, I guess in the early rounds, you dodged the Solgaleo teams that were very unlikely, or the Kyurem teams that were unlikely to make it later on. And then just outplayed everyone else at that point.
Yeah. My plan was that with not many people using Solgaleo or not Kyurem being sort of like a meme hyper offense pick, if I go up against one of those, just got to count on being better than them. And ideally you will be, because ideally it'll be in the earlier rounds. But you never know. Obviously, there's some good players. who are using those as well. So just got to be a bit
Yeah.
lucky there.
I know I had to face Kyurem in I think round 5 of winners, and
Oh yeah.
I guess I'll talk more about my run in my team report, which is coming out tomorrow. But I want to talk a little bit more about your run through Players Cup. Is there one match or one or two matches that are really memorable to you that you want to talk about?
Sure. I think probably one of the ones that sticks out was my matchup against Talon, Cedric Bernier. Not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. I believe he streamed that on his Twitch channel as well. But it was pretty interesting because he had like a Torn Ogre team that was fairly standard, but he had the wrinkle of like Landorus T, specifically Life Orb Landorus, which could be a big problem for Mimikyu because he can lead Kyogre. Landorus, or he also had a Moongus, where he could like Rock Slide, Water Spout turn 1. He could also just like Rock Slide, Spore, and hope for flinches turn 1. So sort of an interesting dichotomy because the team isn't really geared to beat that. So what I ultimately did, like game 1, worked out pretty well. Where turn 1, I essentially led like Incineroar Mimikyu. I actually had him lead, or he led Landorus and Amoonguss. I actually U-turned Safeguarded turn 1, expecting like a Spore and a switch out from Landorus. And then he just Rock Slided to try and get the flinch. So thankfully Mimikyu went off and it safeguarded. And then his Amoonguss moved before my Incineroar and Spored, and I realized it was like a fast Amoonguss. And that was going to be really bad if Mimikyu had flinched and I would have just lost there. So thankfully both moved and I was able to get Calyrex in. And then he tried to knock out Mimikyu, I believe, was what he was going for. I think he like Earthquake Sludge Bombed and then didn't realize how much investment Mimikyu had. So it survived pretty comfortably, and I Trick Roomed Glacial Lance game 1. And then once you get like +2 attack Calyrex before you get Weakness Palsy off and they're down 4-2, it's pretty much over. Game 2, I tried to lead Venusaur because I thought he would switch to a Kyogre lead, and then he just led Landorus again. And Venusaur, when it doesn't have Cove Berry, doesn't do very well against Life Orb Landorus. So he won that one pretty quickly. You can watch me get destroyed in that game if you watch his video. But then in game 3, since he had led the same thing twice in a row, I was pretty confident he was going to lead that again, especially when it had worked in game 2. Then it didn't seem like he had something else he preferred. So I actually led Incineroar Calyrex, which is really risky into Kyogre, because especially when it's like Kyogre and Turbo Amoonguss, where if you get the fake out wrong, they can just like Water Spout and knock out Incineroar and get like 90 off on the Calyrex, or they can just Spore Calyrex turn 1. You can't do anything, you just lose. But since they led the same thing, I was actually able to just like fake out the Amoonguss and Trick Room. I was worried he was going to try and Rock Slide flinch again, but he actually switched out Kyogre. And that's one of the games where the U-turn being slower on Incineroar than Calyrex is actually really helped because he switched Landorus back in. But I was able to get the U-turn off onto Calyrex and get it to a boost, and I was able to move before the Amoonguss did. So I'm not really sure how exactly the roll works out with like -1 or -2 Incineroar Flare Blitz in rain and like -2 Glacial Lance or Hailstorm against like Turbo Amoonguss. But because I was able to just get that off, I was just able to knock it out turn 1. He definitely wasn't expecting it with a slower speed. So I was really able to just sort of win the game from there by getting a surprise knockout, which I think also just speaks one of the strengths of this team, which is it can just go from like 0 to 100 so fast, where you're leading like Incineroar Mimikyu or Indeedee Mimikyu and you're putting 0 pressure on. Then you just switch in Calyrex and you Shadow Sneak, and all of a sudden you're just knocking out everything in one hit. So that was sort of one of the big matchups. My matchup in sort of first game of day 2 was also interesting, but it's also one of the people who was submitting to the stream. So with any luck, I will be on there and you'll be able to watch it then, but not able to talk about it yet. So.
Yeah, of course. And if you're not on stream on April 10th, which is when the regional finals are being streamed, you will definitely be on stream for the global finals, which I believe is being streamed the week afterwards, maybe 2 weeks afterwards. Not entirely sure, but you know who to root for when global finals roll around. And so thank you so much for coming on. This has been really insightful, and this team is obviously just very, very powerful. It's really good into, I think, all of the common teams into the metagame other than maybe Colossal, and so it's definitely worth trying out. Do you have any final words or shout-outs that you want to give?
I guess one shout out. Something that's been really helpful the past few weeks is playing an NPA on the Lad Puppies. You're also on that team. That's how we first met. That's really good to get the practice there. Sort of how I came about this team originally, because I would have tried Calyrex-Ice unless it was just sort of practice in NPAs. It's been a really good experience so far. I'm only a few weeks in. We're doing well, so hopefully just continue doing well there. But
yeah, definitely. Bark, bark, right? And,
yeah, exactly. Lots of barks.
And, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you. And until next time, I will see you all later.
Yep. Thanks for having me.